Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, the scramble to safety continues in Sudan. Foreign governments have airlifted hundreds of people out of the country as fierce fighting between armed military forces continues to upend. And in the UK, several asylum seekers and refugee groups head to court to challenge the government's plans to send migrants from Britain to Rwanda. And ahead of World Malaria Day, a global health chief for the deadly disease warns that beyond just celebrating progress, we also should continue to be aware of the effects that climate change is already having on infection rates. Egypt has denied a report by the Sudanese army that its assistant military attaché was killed by the rapid support forces in the conflict that's still raging in Khartoum. Meanwhile, the scramble continues to evacuate foreign nationals out of the country and the capital in particular. The US has begun moving some of its citizens out over land. The UK has evacuated around 30 diplomatic staff and their families, but around 2,000 other citizens are still stuck in the country. Uncertain as to what comes next, France, meanwhile, has evacuated hundreds of people from about 36 countries. They were sent out to Djibouti, and that's where our Bastien Renouy is. He tells us more.
French soldiers are still on the ground tonight in Khartoum, and I can tell you that the situation is still very risky for them and for all the other people trapped in Khartoum at the moment, because the fighting continues. According to my sources on the ground, they tell me that they can still hear gunshots and explosions. At least one civilian neighborhood was bombed several times today. And you know that it's a very risky situation, because yesterday a French convoy was shot several times, but it's impossible to know if they were targeted and who shot at them, if it was the army or the rapid support forces. Both parties are accusing each other of being responsible, and it's not the only foreign convoy that has been targeted during the past days. According to diplomatic sources, at least 2 other convoys were targeted, so you understand that this operation is very risky.
Thank God I'm safe. That's the first thing. My family is safe. I'd like to thank the Special Forces of France for the amazing mission that they accomplished. It's not easy evacuating your own citizens, let alone other citizens of other nationalities. I know they went through a very stressful mission. As you can say, there's no lives lost. Everyone's safe. They tried to take as much people as they could with them, and I respect them for that fact. They tried to leave as minimal men or women, children left behind as possible.
What did you see on the way to the airstrip? Did you see any fighting or anything like that?
We didn't see any fighting, but we did see a lot of checkpoints. We had to go through a lot of checkpoints. At the beginning, I think there was a part of the rapid support forces that was escorting, but to a certain limit, because they knew that it would be a risk for us and a risk for them to be associated. I don't know if it was or if it was the Sudanese armed forces that was assisting in the escort. There were some issues. I heard that the Sudanese armed forces were in the airport, were making it very difficult for a lot of the Sudanese to leave the country, because a lot of these people have like dual citizenships. But even then, they did not want them to leave. You feel like they wanted to make it harder for them to leave.
Now, in the UK, several asylum seekers and refugee groups headed to court on Monday to challenge the government's plans to send migrants from Britain to Rwanda. At the start of the 4-day hearing, the claimant's lawyer alleged that there had been a failure to scrutinise assurances that people sent to Rwanda would not be ill-treated. Clément de Roma with more.
Lawyers representing asylum seekers told the London Court of Appeal on Monday that Rwanda was not a safe country and said that the UK is failing to abide to its human rights obligation. The British Conservative government wants to send thousands of refugees to Kigali as quickly as possible. Facing the judges, its lawyers said that the agreement will be subject to rigorous checks on the ground and therefore rejects the accusations of human rights violations. Yet this Monday morning, before the hearing, more than 800 British health professionals signed a letter saying that the migrant deal could cause catastrophic physical and psychological harm to those who do not want to travel to the land of 1,000 Hills. The Court of Appeal's decision is due this Thursday. If the refugees lose the case, the option of an appeal to the Supreme Court will remain and could further delay the departure of a first flight to Rwanda. Kigali says it is now ready to receive asylum seekers and continues to build hundreds of homes to accommodate them.
At least 73 people, members of a cult, are thought to have died of starvation after their pastor told them that they would meet Jesus if they fatally fasted. In Kenya on Monday, 26 more bodies were exhumed at Paul Mackenzie's 800-acre ranch in Malindi in the south of the country. He's been arrested, and President William Ruto has compared the circumstances of the victims' deaths to the results of terrorist acts. Now, World Malaria Day is on Tuesday, but one of the international health chiefs with a focus on the deadly disease has started the week sounding the alarm about a rise in infections. Peter Sands has pointed to Malawi, where Hurricane Freddy triggered 6 months' worth of rainfall in just 6 days earlier this year, and he's warned that events like that drive up infection rates of the waterborne disease. The vast majority of malaria cases and fatalities in the world are in Africa. In 2021, that amounted to 96% of all deaths, or 593,000 deaths, with most fatalities being children. Peter Sands joins me now for more on the work that he's doing to battle the growing numbers of malaria cases. Peter, thanks very much for speaking to me. Now, you've mentioned that you're particularly worried about the link between a ramping up in cases of malaria and climate change. Deaths and cases had been dropping, but have risen over the past few years, in part because of hotter and wetter weather in parts of the continent. Extreme weather events also devastate health infrastructure. So for you, what do you think's needed to climate-proof the global fight against malaria?
Well, thanks for inviting me on for this. Look, if malaria is a fire, climate change is like gasoline. It really makes it more deadly, more powerful. And the first thing we need to do is have less of the fire. So we should take the impetus of climate change as an incentive to really accelerate what we're doing against malaria. This is a disease we know how to beat, and we should try and bash it back as far as possible before climate change makes it more difficult to combat.
And so what kind of methods are you using to bash it back as much as possible?
Well, malaria is quite a complex disease because it involves both the mosquito and a parasite. And you have to use multiple tools, whether it's insecticide-impregnated bed nets, treatments, diagnostics, vaccines. There's a range of tools you need to use. The important thing, though, is that we can beat it. Every year, more countries are declared malaria-free. It's just that in the places that are most heavily affected, which are the poorest parts of Africa, it is still killing a child every minute.
Now, there have been some very important breakthroughs in malaria vaccination, and Ghana and Nigeria have this month rushed to approve the rollout of a jab for babies, even before it's been approved by the World Health Organization. So for you, how much of a hope does this R21 vaccine represent?
R21 vaccine is definitely an important new tool, and it's hugely welcome. But we shouldn't think of it as a silver bullet. We don't know yet how long the duration of protection is, and we are going to need all the other tools as well. But don't get me wrong, it's a really important new tool. And if anything, we should use the fact that we've got new tools, not just the vaccine, but also better bed nets, to encourage us to really beat the disease now.
Now, you said that the biggest factor holding back anti-malaria efforts globally is a lack of political will. So, first of all, why do you think that there's a shortfall in this kind of will? And who do you have in mind when you're thinking about who you'd like to be more politically willing?
It's a really good question. I mean, when you think about it, we're talking about a disease which we know how to beat and which we are, in a sense, allowing to kill a child every minute. If that was happening in the rich countries in the world, surely we would be acting faster. We need political commitment both by the leaders of the countries in which malaria is most present and by those who can provide external support. The Global Fund provides almost 2/3 of all external financing for malaria, but we're spending as much as one big hospital in a major Western capital. Surely the world can do better than that when so many children's lives are at risk.
Thank you so much, Peter Sands there from the Global Fund for the Fight Against AIDS, Tuberculosis and Malaria.
Thank you.
Now, Uganda's seen a new wave of hatred and homophobic demonstrations sweep through the country since January. Homosexuality is already illegal, but the government's manoeuvring to crack down on people's sexuality harder than anywhere else. A new homophobic bill has provoked outrage from some Ugandan and Western NGOs. Olivia Bizot tells us more.
Living in hiding. Somewhere in Uganda's capital is this shelter for lesbian women. Gone are the days when its residents could be themselves and feel even remotely safe. Staff at the shelter have told them to be discreet and blend into their surroundings, even if that means changing their behaviour and physical appearance.
Like, you look at yourself in the mirror before you get home, you're like, do I look too queer? Should I get my rainbows off? Because that's my identity. That's like, I'm colourful. Like, so you have to select your clothing, your jewelry, your everything, because everybody's just on alert and it's dangerous.
Following a suspected case of paedophilia between a teacher and a young boy in January, a homophobic fever took hold of the country. The authorities and the media blamed this criminal act on the whole of the LGBT community. At the end of March, the Ugandan parliament voted in favour of a new so-called anti-homosexuality bill.
We are going to reinforce the law enforcement officers to make sure that homosexuals have no space in Uganda. You will have no space in Uganda.
The bill is one of the toughest pieces of anti-gay legislation in the world. If the president decides to approve this text, members of the LGBT community could risk the rest of their lives in prison. They could even be condemned to death.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa for now. Thanks for joining us. Do so again. Till then, take care.